Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all had a good rest and that we shall continue the dialogue with the distinguished delegation from Yemen in the spirit that we started yesterday. This is the 2869th meeting of the Human Rights Committee, and I give the floor to Her Excellency the Minister to introduce the delegation and replies. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
On behalf of God, the all-forgiving, yesterday we listened to the questions that touched upon a wide range of topics that reflect the very high caliber and professionalism of professionals in the area of human rights. And with regard to the answers provided to your questions, well, of course, because we had time constraints, we tried as much as possible to answer your questions. But if you believe that you still have questions or further observations, we are here before you. We are prepared and available to answer further questions if there are still answers required. Other questions perhaps were not touched upon yesterday, or questions which you did not have time to ask yesterday and that we will cover today. We will try to use the time allotted to us today efficiently so that we can address all of the different comments you may have. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Minister. I think your delegation was at the point of responding to further questions yesterday.
Yeah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أحييكم أيها السادة.
Good morning, everyone, and I also would like to thank Madam Chair as well as the Minister for having given me the floor. Now, first of all, I would like to underscore the issue of presenting information. You asked for very specific information and statistics, and we did try to provide you with some statistics. However, unfortunately, we have come up against some problems with regard to gathering very specific and precise statistics. And this is really due to the fact that the statistics services in my country are grappling with, as well as other governmental reports. In these reports, there have obviously been certain generalities which do not pertain to your request of specific and precise statistics, as has been the case for international statistics. And we do not, unfortunately, always have precise, specific statistics. For example, in the case of abusive arrests, cases of torture, or other forms of condemnation. Now, penal issues. For example, we cannot provide you with a clear-cut figure as you have requested. For example, statistics do not point out specifically, for example, how many premeditated murders we have had. Of course, areas where the authorities are implicated. Now, we also have some institutional shortcomings in gathering information and archiving information, and in the majority of cases, unfortunately, we pay a great price for this because we lose valuable information that we cannot make up for later on. Now, with regard to your request as to the number of arrests. Well, I would like to point out a number of cases where lawyers refer to the International Covenant for Political and Civil Rights. Unfortunately, though, well, I do not have at my disposal all of the statistics to know as to the court decisions on these cases and whether or not they refer to these international instruments or covenants. There have been, of course, attempts at the national level to include these instruments in the court decisions and judgments. And we are trying to ensure that judges should use these international covenants and instruments. And the government now is conducting a campaign to publish these covenants and instruments in international journals so that the judges and the courts can use them. With regards to the Al-Akhdam minority, which is a population of minorities that is discriminated against. The state sees this group as a group of people that, unfortunately, due to the political and social and historical circumstances, have ended up being discriminated against and marginalized. And this means that they have had a marginal role in society. Now, at the official level, the Yemenite government does not officially discriminate against the obligations and rights of these minorities. However, these minorities have suffered from discrimination socially, and this has been quite evident. This population can be characterized in several ways. They have about 80% of illiteracy. These people are the poorest in our society in Yemen. They have very serious problems with health, of course, and also a very high level of demographic concentration in shanty towns. They don't have access to electricity or running water in the neighborhoods where they live, and quite often they also lack access to state services. They don't have access to education, and this often means that children leave school at a very early age. Yemen has set up a number of measures in order to overcome the situation of discrimination and to conduct reforms and to pull this group out of their conditions. Today, we are trying to integrate them into development plans and to provide better housing in Sana'a. And so we have built over 2,586 new houses for them to make sure that they can leave these shanty towns and live in this new housing so that they can be integrated into Yemen society slowly but surely. We have given a great deal of importance to the integration of this population in public life in all of its aspects. For example, for them to participate in elections. This minority group has been able to be elected to public office, and they have been able to enjoy their rights as citizens who can participate in elections during the last elections. Now, we have about 19 activists from this minority group taking part in an association for minorities, and they have been able to be elected during the 2006 elections in the Taiz and Sana'a departments. This minority, of course, also has set up their own associations, civil society organizations. There are about 48 NGOs that they participate in Sana'a under the name of the National Union of the Poorest Minorities. What's more, They also benefit from other forms of aid, for example, health aid that has been provided to them through the Fund for Handicapped People. The number of people who have benefited from this fund and this assistance is about 200,000 people. And the Reintegration Fund for Handicapped People between 2005 and 2007 means that 5,000 people have been able to take advantage. The state has taken a number of other measures in order to make sure that the Akhdam minorities are integrated into schools and to improve their public health conditions. We have granted them reduced fees for schooling. We have provided them with microcredit facilities. We have helped associations from this minority group for them to set up their own projects, especially for education, and to provide schools for them that will be located closer to areas where they live. We have also organized projects and programs that focus on children from this minority group, and to make sure that these children become a full-fledged part of the society of Yemen. The state of Yemen has also implemented a strategy for young people and children to make sure that they're fully integrated into society. With regard to the committee's question on the rights of people living in cities, in our report, we stress the legal guarantees that must be in place before judgment is passed with regard to capital punishment. Now, in the recommendations that your committee presented to us under report number 4, you stressed that we should reduce the number of cases where capital punishment is resorted to, and to reduce that as much as possible, and with regard to specifically to very grave and serious crimes only. Now, we have focused on those who work in criminal law, and we have set up a commission of these people that has also presented a number of recommendations on this front. And finally, they have said that we need to reduce the number of capital punishment cases. We held a conference recently on this topic, the issue of the right to life. And we do hope that as soon as possible, these recommendations should be integrated into the legal framework and the administrative frameworks of Yemen. Now, with regard to your question on torture and how we are combating torture, we have undertaken a number of measures in Yemen. Of course, we have detailed these measures in our report on the Convention Against Torture and all the other forms of inhuman or cruel punishment, and this was presented in 2008 to the Commission. I already stressed the reforms we've conducted in the area of penal justice, and we have also presented recommendations as part of our campaign to ban and combat torture. You mentioned the fact that we do not define torture in our laws. I would like to say that Yemen has integrated these recommendations in the framework of our program for justice, for penal justice, and in the framework of the measures taken by the government to update and to adapt our laws to international instruments. And so we believe that in short order, we will be integrating a definition of torture in our national legislation. Also, the need to provide indemnity to victims of torture for psychological rehabilitation and for their rehabilitation in terms of the condition of their health. This is all for victims of torture. A field visit has been conducted into prisons, into the courts throughout the territory of Yemen. And we have been able to see that there indeed had been cases of torture. We have gathered a great deal of information, and this has been provided in a written answer that we sent to you recently. With regard to the registration of new births, Yemen has also undertaken a systematic registration of all children born in Yemen, and this has become free of charge since 2007. What's more, we are establishing a computerized system of birth certificates. Thanks to assistance provided through UNICEF, we launched a pilot program in a number of hospitals in Sana'a, and now we will start to expand this principle of birth certificate registration in the coming years. So these birth certificates, the obtaining of birth certificates will be free nationwide. We have organized over 10 workshops on this topic to raise awareness amongst the population as to the importance of registering the births of their children. We have also created information centers, computerized information centers in 4 areas of Yemen to make sure that they can have their copies of birth certificates once the political situation permits us to do so. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience and your attention. I give the floor back to the Minister. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director General. I will now call on Mr. Iwasawa to take the floor. He has a follow-up question.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to make some comments rather than asking further questions. First of all, I'd like to thank the members of the distinguished delegation for the for your openness and frankness in responding to my questions. I raised many issues relating to minorities and women, and many of the issues, the distinguished delegations responded to many of the issues I raised. Our views may not coincide, but I'm very pleased with the openness and frankness that the members of the distinguished delegation responded to my issues. And I'd like to take a special note of the 2 points that was made in the responses. First of all, I'm very pleased that the head of the delegation said it was a priority for the government of Yemen to set a minimum age for marriage. Even though the attempt was not successful, I hope we will succeed in the next time. Secondly, I'm very pleased with to receive the information that in the new constitution, you are trying to include a quota of women in the representation of women in various posts. This is new information I received, and I'm very I take note of it with satisfaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Mr. Bouzid.
شكرا سيدة الوزيرة.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Minister. I'm extremely satisfied and pleased with the answers provided by the Minister, especially with regard to the creation of the Human Rights Commission in Yemen, and that this commission will be set up within a year. In other words, you are now moving ahead very swiftly. I also would like to thank you on the situation in the south that you are studying now, and that there are no red lines or limitations on discussing this issue, and that in the framework of this transition period you have found a satisfactory solution. With regard to the ministerial decision number 4 in 2012, you've set up a ministerial commission that is thinking about creating an independent commission to inquire as to human rights violations. Have you established a timeline, a calendar for the work of this commission? When will it start working, and when will this commission start hearing statements from potential victims? Thank you.
I'll now give the floor to Mr. O'Flaherty.
I too can be brief, and I think I'll put my observation in the form of a comment more than a question. I'm very grateful indeed for the answers yesterday and the evident determination of the Minister to address so many human rights issues. It's a vast challenge that the government confronts, but nobody can doubt the sincerity. On just one issue yesterday, we heard and it's obviously very good to know that the criminal prohibition of same-sex sexual activity and the capital penalty has not been exercised in a very long time, and this is obviously welcome. However, we would ask that the state party, as a matter of urgency, take the next step, which is decriminalisation. As I said yesterday, Yemen is in the very unhappy situation of being just one of 7 countries worldwide that have the death penalty, and it would be very important for Yemen to show leadership, not only in removing the penalty formally from the law books, but also in a complete decriminalisation. Thank you.
Thank you. I will give the floor back to the Minister if you have any responses to this follow-up questions. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you for your comments and your statements. With regard to the minimal age for marriage, obviously the Human Rights Ministry, the National Commission for Women, the national associations, of course, have mentioned these issues. This is a very important topic in our society. In cases where girls are married at a very young age and have suffered emotionally and physically from that, a girl who's married off at 8 years of age and who suffers psychologically and physically, well, the legal text, Article 15 of the Civil Code, does not punish this type of act. And gives the rights to the father to decide whether or not the girl is of an age where she can live maritally and to have sexual relations. If the father decides so, she can do that. No girls bring these girls to hospitals to make sure that these girls are mature enough to live maritally, physically, and emotionally. And this is a problem for us, and it is a top priority that we need to face. Unfortunately, we have had to face certain problems and obstacles. The current parliament is handling a great deal of other issues and problems at this time. But this doesn't mean that the rights of children remain a priority for us. We must ensure that this is integrated into our laws and for this to be institutionalized in order to improve the situation. Unfortunately, the basic groups in Parliament do say this. They insist on these reactionary ideas. That's the hurdle. We are trying to overcome these cultural obstacles. The parliament has been elected 9 years ago. It's a very long period. They've been reelected for another 2 years, but these are the same people. So this means we are still going to have to deal with these problems and obstacles in this parliament, because these are the same members of parliament who have been putting up these obstacles for years now. In spite of this, however, we are continuing to make every effort to settle this problem and also to punish anyone who breaks the law on this front. With regard to quotas for women, yesterday I said that this is part of our national strategy for a 30% quota for women.
And we have also established a quota of 20%. We believe that in the medium term and the long term, we have had to tackle a number of problems as a result of the situation Yemen is facing. We do feel, however, that this is a fair quota that we have established now, one that we can implement. Currently, women in Yemen have organized a national conference. This is to be held on the 19th and 20th of March next week. And this is a national conference aimed at addressing the political rights of women, women's representation in the political sphere. This reflects the important role that women played in the Arab Spring and in the revolution in Yemen. This was unprecedented. Women were essential in bringing about a revolution in Yemen. And Yemeni decision makers are aware now that without women, it will be impossible to evolve and to change without ensuring that women are part of the process, that they are organized, and that their rights are upheld. And if women are able to become organized in this manner by supporting a strong feminist movement that is able to exercise pressure, then we will also see an increase in the quotas. Women's role has become a very important role. And this is something that is to be reflected in the Constitution. This issue of the quota is also to be reflected in the Constitution in order to help us tackle the obstacles posed by the fundamentalists and by the radicals who keep trying to push women out of the political sphere. If we have a constitutional text in place, a text that would clearly stipulate the political rights of women, that would be most significant, and that would have repercussions in our national legislation and in the legislation governing political parties, and accordingly would compel the political parties to abide by the Constitution regardless of the faith of the political party or the particular beliefs it may uphold, its ideologies or differing cultural social beliefs. Everybody would be compelled to uphold the Constitution. Of course, there are political parties who continue to reject the participation of women in the political sphere. And once again, if we have a constitutional text in place, then we will be able to address this. I do believe that there has been a significant improvement. The National Coalition Government has ensured women are involved in the ministries. Previously, there were only 1 or 2 female ministers, whereas now the situation is quite different. There are more than 11% of the members are women now, and that is a significant change. It may appear only to be a relative change, but it's still a significant change. Now, with regard to the independent human rights entity, all civil society organizations and associations are very interested in the establishment of this body, as this is to be an independent body. We launched the initiative to establish this body, and the government has implemented a policy to that end, bringing together civil society organizations, national human rights bodies, as well as international organizations and NGOs, for the sake of opening an office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And that has also helped us propel this project forward in order to set up this human rights body, which will be based on the Paris Principles. And I believe it should be up and running within a year. With regard to the Independent Commission of Inquiry that will be investigating the acts, the various violations, this is to be an independent and neutral body that is well acquainted with international humanitarian law. And we've set up a streamlined ministerial unit that is investigating how to best set up this body. What mandate will it have? What will its timetabling be? And ultimately, we reached the decision that this new committee requires a legal framework for its actions. Witnesses will only be able to gain access to state-held files if a legal framework can be guaranteed. So this is a concept that is an evolving concept. It has developed, and we have progressed since the revolution. This is something that is currently under discussion with various civil society organizations too, who have insisted that this be an independent body, that it be able to transfer personal dossiers, personal files to courts. Now, the issue of the southern movement of the South is also very much topical in ongoing discussions. If we fail to give this issue priority attention, it will become a problem, as it will give rise to instability. And we know that we also have to tackle the issue of underdevelopment in the region, and therefore this requires critical attention. Everybody is well aware that this is a problem, and it has become a priority for us. In the context of the National Dialogue Conference, that will give us an opportunity to discuss future projects and to scope out further solutions such as a federal system, the installation of a federal system in Yemen. And ultimately, the representatives of the southern movement in Yemen will be able to voice their opinions. With regard to the homosexual issue, this is an issue that is addressed by Islamic Sharia. The Constitution stipulates that Islamic Sharia is the principal source of our legislation. And this issue is therefore still addressed from the angle of Islamic Sharia. Thank you.
I thank you, Minister Ahmed, for your responses. We are now going to address the second half of the list of issues, that is issues 19 to 39. And I'll open the floor for members to pose questions, make comments on these issues. I do want to remind members that we're talking about 20 issues here, and we also need to bear in mind that the delegation have to answer and hopefully to interact with us before the close of this meeting at 1. With that, I give the floor to Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will try to heed your warning as to time. Let me first of all join colleagues in welcoming the distinguished delegation of Yemen, headed by a senior representative, which gives us some comfort, obviously. I would like to focus on what is happening at the moment. We have been giving a picture by you yourself, Madam Minister. Yesterday, you referred to the fact that were not the internationally brokered agreement in place, your country might be in civil war. I think the expression you used yesterday was that there was to avert a looming civil war. Well, some observers would claim that as we speak, there are parts of Yemen where armed conflict of a non-international character is actually happening. And that, of course, I think gives rise to serious considerations. But it also speaks well of the ambition that you have put to us here in trying to come to grips with the human rights violation. You have given us a broad array of reforms which are to take place in the transitional period, reforms which are being undertaken with the assistance of the international community. And we all know that institution building is difficult. I have some limited experience in another part of the world previously, namely in the Balkans, where the institution building efforts that we started to undertake in the middle of the 90s are still not finished as we speak. I'm talking about Bosnia-Herzegovina primarily. I say this to give you the understanding that I, on my part, fully understand all the challenges that you are facing. But my problem is this. It seems, and my issues are 19 to 23. But as my colleague Mr. Fatala pointed out yesterday, there has been water under the bridge since the report was submitted and also since we put our questions in writing. So I will rephrase the issues, and they are broken down in two. One has to do with the illegal deprivation of liberty and security. And those are implicit in issues 19 to 21. In 22 and 23, we have the issues of the prison system. And I said, my problem is this. It has been put to us by international observers and NGOs that while the transition of the executive, and by that I mean the president, has happened, the present president does not have full control of the security forces or the army. And that, of course, is a serious concern. So firstly, I would like to have your comment on that. And secondly, whether you would be willing, without any delay as a government, to allow international independent monitors to enter the country and assist you while you at the parallel are doing the long-term institution building. There is a need to safeguard the short-term respect for human rights. And I think you could, in my opinion, be greatly assisted by the efforts of NGOs and others in this respect. I say that because it has been put to us that we have a number of security services, and I'm going to read them out as it's been put to me. We have the Criminal Investigation Department. We have the Directorate General for Counterterrorism. We have the Counterterrorism Unit. We have the Central Service for Public Security, also called Political Security. And we have the National Security. And finally, we have the Armed Forces of Yemen. That is a lot of security forces. And it has been put to us that they, at the moment, are under no supervision whatsoever. If that is correct, I would like to have your comment on that proposition. And if that is correct, my question would then be, what do you intend to do in the short term regarding this? I noticed and listened very attentively to your answers, both yesterday and today, where there was a reference made to an investigation commission or a body, and you referred to it just recently, saying that it needs to be put in a legal frame in order for it to work properly. Well, that takes time. And in the meantime, my question is, who is exercising the civilian supervision of all these security forces? And I include the army. And I think yesterday, Madam Minister, you made a reference to the fact that investigations pertaining to the military sector is dealt with by the military justice system. Well, I put it to you, Madam, that maybe also that part should be done, not by the military, but by the civilian system. And that brings me to another issue. Are the courts, as we speak now, are they functioning? It's a general question. Other colleagues will address issues regarding Article 14 later. So those are some general questions regarding deprivation of liberty. And in this context, let me put another question. We have, as you can see in our early decision, a list of issues in 20 and 21 dealt with a number of claimed arrests, 2,200 in 2009. Well, to that figure should be added information that we have received that during the unrest last year, some 2,500 were illegally arrested and presently detained. So that would bring it to nearly 5,000. I would like to have your comment on that. I listened carefully to you, Madam Minister, yesterday. You said that some of those illegal arrested had been released, but I didn't understand when and how many, and if we can anticipate a soon release also of the remaining. And that brings me to the question of what is done with the private prisons. In 21, there is a reference to a specific sheikh, and I understand that tribal loyalties play an important role in the present situation in Yemen. And I just want to have an understanding of what the government is doing to try to avoid the continuous private deprivation of liberty and private prisons as we have them. And that finally brings me to the prison situation. I'm certainly fully aware, and you made reference yesterday to that resources are scarce. Well, they're scarce even in more advanced countries. So prisons are expensive. I fully realize that. But I would be amiss if I didn't give you a snapshot, as we have been given it, of how the situation in the prisons are at the moment. And I'm referring to a submission to us by Alkarama, dated 1st of February 2012. In paragraph 145, and I'm certain, Madam, that you and your delegation are privy to this information. In 145, it transpires that in the Hodeidah governance prisons, a facility which is designed to house 350 inmates. There were at the time, which was in 2010, 1,500 inmates. Of those, 160 were detained illegally, and of course the facilities regarding food, water and sanitary conditions were not satisfactory. 70 uniforms were to be shared by these 350 inmates for appearance in court. My question is this a fair description of the situation in Yemen at the moment? If it is, I suggest that even short-term measures need to be done in order for you to be in compliance with Article 10. Finally, I take it that in your long-term reform plans and the prison system, there would be ample room for alternative sentencing. And that's one of the questions that we had put to you. So whatever you could respond to that. Let me say that in order to save time, some of these issues I'll be happy to receive in writing. But the most immediate ones, I would be happy to have your response now. Who is exercising the supervision of the security apparatus in the broader sense as we speak? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Ms. Waterville.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me also join my colleagues in warmly welcoming the distinguished delegation of Yemen. We hope that your country will soon recover from last year's unrest and that all institutions will be restored and or reformed in order to better protect human rights. I will cover issues 24, 25, 26, and 29, and I will try to be brief. According to information received, people are imprisoned for failing to repay their debts or fulfill their contractual obligation, and that Prisoners' Committee provides annual assistance to repay debts of insolvents to secure their release. These imprisonments are contrary to the covenant What measures will be taken to be in compliance with the covenant regarding this issue? My second issue is about the specialized criminal court. These courts were established in 1999 by presidential decree to try the crime of hiraba. These are acts of attacking, terrorizing, or robbing people in public places, buildings, etc. In 2004, the court's jurisdiction has been expanded to include offenses harmful to state security and offenses with serious repercussion for society or the economy. In 2009, the Supreme Judicial Council issued a decision clarifying that the court has jurisdiction over a wide range of security-related offenses. Since then, critics and opponents of the then government have been tried before these courts rather than the ordinary criminal courts. And lawyers have frequently faced restriction in accessing their clients, which raised concern about the fairness of the trials, which are contrary to Article 14 of the Covenant. And these sessions were not open to the public. Many Yemenis lawyers believe that this court is unconstitutional, since the Yemeni Constitution, Article 148 to 150, prohibits the establishment of such specialized courts, and further, that also its existence was not discussed or approved by Parliament. Can you elaborate on this issue, especially in explaining the place of these specialized courts in the legal system, ensuring international fair trial standards, and disclosing the grounds and procedure governing restrictions on lawyers and public access to specialized court sessions? The next issue is about independence of the judiciary and corruption in the judiciary. There is concern about the independence of the judiciary since the executive authorities of the state are able to exercise great influence over the judicial system, since the Minister of Justice sits on the Supreme Judicial Council and his ministry appraises the work and competence of judges and can affect their promotion and lead to disciplinary actions. There is also concern about the widespread corruption among judges and court officers. Please state what measures have been taken to ensure the full independence and impartiality of the judiciary, free from interference from the executive branch, and measures to fight corruption. Does the amnesty law also include immunity for the judges and court officers with regard to corruption? The last issue is about the right to privacy. The committee has learned that the Political Security Organization and the Ministry of Interior routinely search homes and private offices, monitor telephone calls, read personal mails and emails, all contrary to the covenant. This situation was in 2009. Can you tell us what the situation is now? And will you please address this issue? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Mr. Buzit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions, 27 and 28. Regarding the issue 27, regarding the fact that the judges base themselves on the responses given under the torture and other ill treatment. My question is, in the final reform plan that you have, would this issue be included in such reform plan so that there would be no more any sentences based on such responses given under torture? And would this be codified in a form of a law? I would like you to elaborate on this issue. As to the next issue regarding the rape in general, I know that you have tackled this issue yesterday, and therefore I'm not going to repeat a question on this issue in particular. Thank you, Madam Chair.
To Mr. Rivas Posada.
Gracias. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I did not have the opportunity to participate in the dialogue, but I would not wish to miss this opportunity to echo what was said by my colleagues in order to warmly welcome the delegation of Yemen. Undeniably, we are facing a most specific situation, not a unique situation, but a specific situation where a country and the state party are in a process of transformation, of change, of political reform and social reform, we hope, which have helped awaken great expectations, not only among the Yemeni society, but also in the international community, with regard to the improvements in many areas of social life in terms of the protection and respect for human rights. The report that was submitted by the state party is a report that dates before this reform process began. And that means that the list of questions was drawn up before these new expectations for change were launched. And of course, we are very satisfied at these new expectations, given the mandate of this committee. And once again, these are expectations that are held by the entire international community. And that means that these comments and these concerns that are raised by the various members of the committee must be studied in the light of what is to take place in the future developments and the future efforts that the state party must now make in order to help rectify many of the earlier situations that were brought to our attention in the past, situations that led to violations of human rights, or at least worrying situations with regard to the protection of these human rights. And accordingly, that means that this is an opportunity creating new expectations, and it is also a timely opportunity to repeat and to underscore many of the observations that were made in the past. And basically, I would like to refer to those aspects pertaining to religious freedom, freedom of movement, freedom of religion, freedom of expression and of opinion, and freedom of assembly. So, to be as concise as possible, my questions concern issues 30 to 36 of the list of questions. Now, the first concern I wish to raise concerns the freedom of religion, and it is as follows. To what extent is conversion to another religion other than Islam, is this permitted by the state party or not? Is this something that is regulated by law? Or is this governed by a religious norm? So far, there is there is no clarity on this regard. There have been significant demonstrations of dissatisfaction regarding the situation. And therefore, we would like to understand whether this is not only prohibited, but whether it is also criminalized. And if so, then that would be a clear and express violation of the freedom of religion, as it is clearly reflected in the Covenant, and as is also reflected in the case law as developed by this committee, and as is also very clearly stipulated in Decision 22 on the freedom of religion and belief. And as a result, it would be very important that you submit clear information to us in the future indicating the legal repercussions of this aspect. If you could explain to us whether this is a religious norm or a legal norm. With regard to the freedom of religion also, the committee has expressed concerns regarding possible restrictions that have been placed on the freedom of a number of religious groups or religious sects. The Shiite minority, for example, in light of the information we have received, has been unable to freely express its religious views and values. The Saidi and the Itna Asheri sects have also been targeted in a similar fashion. And the information we have received also demonstrated that there has been anti-Semitic demonstrations in the past. And actually, in the future, any such acts or events, any anti-Semitic demonstrations must be prohibited in order to guarantee the freedom of religion of all groups without any discrimination whatsoever, in order to comply with the provisions of the Covenant. With regard to military service and conscientious objections to military service, we have not received any information. In the previous reports that were submitted, there is no reference, there are no clear references with regard to the situation of conscientious objectors in Yemen. And it is very important to recall that while it is true that the Covenant does not expressly enshrine as such the freedom to object to the provision of military service and the right of conscientious objection, our committee has developed clear case law indicating that this freedom is indeed a related aspect of Article 18 of the Covenant, and that therefore the states parties must guarantee that there is a freedom of conscientious objection as a result of the respect for the freedom of thought, opinion, and expression. And therefore, the state party must ensure that mechanisms are in place for an individual to provide an alternative service to military service that are not punitive in nature, in order to help ease the constraints on an individual who does not wish to undergo military service. Moving on to freedom of movement. Here, the state party must also make further progress in seeking to dismantle any obstacles in the way of freedom of movement. According to information we received in the past, there were very clear restrictions and very clear constraints that were placed on individuals and their freedom of movement of foreigners, for example. And this impeded their free movement in all areas of the state party. Also, the same applies to possible restrictions that are placed on demonstrations or protest movements in view of the difficulties that these groups have encountered in the past in seeking to move freely throughout the national territory. A further aspect that we also wish to underscore and draw to your attention is the committee's concern regarding the freedom of expression. Above all, the exercise in freedom of expression with regard to the work of journalists and newspapers. The report contains a number of pages which reflect the diversity of the media in your country, the various newspapers, the television channels, the radio. And of course, this is something that is very satisfying to hear about. We're very pleased to hear that there is a broad range and a most diverse range of media, of communicative media. But the reports submitted to the committee in the past have indicated repeatedly that many restrictions were in place and that there are still cases where individuals have been punished for exercising their freedom of opinion and expression. And one such case that created great concern was the fact that a tribunal or a court had been established to try journalists. A court to try cases related to the media, and this is tantamount to the criminalization of the freedom of opinion and expression, and therefore is clearly a violation of the principles of the Covenant with regard to the freedom of opinion and expression. And then finally, I also wish to flag our concerns with regard to the various restrictions that have been placed on assemblies and associations and the possible abuse of force, the abusive use of force preventing such assemblies and associations from taking place in the past. In general terms, we have heard many complaints about the excessive use of force repressing protest movements, which also is a worrying aspect, and again an area where the state party must closely study the manner in which it can fully guarantee this freedom that is enshrined by the Covenant, the freedom of assembly. Those are our main concerns, Madam Chair. And it is very important to ensure that these concerns are addressed in the future process, in this interesting process that the state party has now embarked on. And as committee members, we trust that you will devote sufficient attention to these issues in order to make further progress. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Mr. Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam. I would like to refer to the last three items on the list of issues, 37 to 39. With regard to 37, which deals with issues of freedom of association and particularly for the operation of trades unions, I wonder if the distinguished delegation could give us a better sense of how trade unions are controlled and organised in the state party. We have information before us, which I'm not completely clear on, to the effect that there is a central state-controlled union which has to authorise all subordinate trade union activity in the country, and that very often the subordinate trade union activity within particular industries or particular sectors is not permitted or is impeded or is not given the necessary authorisations. So, to be quite frank, I'm unclear on how labour unions are organised, and would be very grateful to get a sense of how this matter is dealt with, and the delegation's view as to the extent to which it is compatible with Article 22 of the Covenant, which guarantees freedom of association. Moving then to issue 38 of our list, which deals with general problems of corruption and more specifically allegations of fraudulent voter registration. Again, it would be good to get a sense from the delegation of the extent to which there are issues of this nature in the state party. Would it be fair to say that there is an endemic problem of corruption, which then has a knock-on effect for the enjoyment of all Covenant rights? The NGO Transparency International, back in 2009, I think it was, indicated, according to one of their tabular indices, that Yemen was ranked 141st out of 180 countries in terms of perceptions of corruption. And it would be good to get a sense of whether this is a government priority and what's being done to tackle it. And then more specifically and much more directly and intimately related to a given article of the Covenant, the claims of the persistence of fraudulent voter registration, which of course would run counter to Article 25 of the Covenant, if indeed that is an ongoing problem. I say if it's an ongoing problem because the information we have dates back to 2009, so it may well be something that's being dealt with. Finally, issue 39. Issue 39 must look a little bit odd given the very high seriousness of so much of what we discussed. 39 is a sort of a general paragraph that refers to dissemination of knowledge of the Covenant and so forth. Given all the matters, the dreadfully serious matters we're looking at both this morning and yesterday, it may seem not to be in the first rank of issues. But it does provide us with a very useful opportunity to reflect with the delegation on how it can now, in this new phase of governance, how it can promote what we sometimes term a culture of human rights in Yemen. There are important opportunities now to put human rights at the heart of governance and to empower the people of the state party through an awareness that they have human rights and that they're entitled to demand them. And so it would be good to get a sense, perhaps, of your own ministry's plans to promote such a culture of human rights. For instance, is it envisaged to have an overarching national human rights plan of action which would address all issues of human rights, including covenant rights? And finally, and it closely relates to what we heard just a few moments ago from other colleagues, I think it was particularly Mr. Thalen, of the extent to which Yemen could benefit enormously through international cooperation at this point towards developing a human rights culture in the state party. And I have in mind here in particular the rich possibilities opened up by a good partnership with the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. But one which allows that office to carry out the full range of its functions. Yes, it can undoubtedly provide tremendous capacity building assistance, undoubtedly, but that will really only have depth and integrity if it's delivered in the same within a program that also sturdily monitors and reports on the human rights situation. One cannot have effective capacity building without a sound knowledge base, and so the two must go hand in hand. And so I would strongly encourage Yemen to pursue negotiations with the Office of the High Commissioner towards a fully mandated field operation being present in the country. I think that would tremendously assist in addressing the sorts of issues that are touched on in the spirit of point 39 of the list of issues. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank the members of the committee for raising all these important issues. Your Excellency, I will give your delegation a break of 15 minutes to arrange your replies once again. And with that, I suspend the meeting for 15 minutes. We should be back in the room at 11:30. Ladies and gentlemen, we resume the meeting, and I shall give the floor to the Minister Ahmed, to address the remaining questions that have been put forward by members of the committee. You have the floor, Your Excellency.
شكرا جزيلا سيدتي الرئيسة.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you very much to the committee members. Later on, I will give the floor to my colleague in order to answer the various questions. The first question concerning the convention that Yemen has ascribed to in order to prevent war. For example, is the Gulf Cooperation Council Convention. There are a number of significant treaties and conventions in place seeking to resolve the political problems of the country. As the only option that we have available to us, other than these political agreements, the only other alternative is civil war. There are always ongoing confrontations and conflicts. You referred to that. And there are also enclaves where armed conflicts have taken place and where armed groups operating outside of the state authority are active. In Abyan, for example, the Al-Qaeda movement is active. There are armed groups who engage with other groups. And there are also problems and disputes between tribes. But these types of conflicts, these types of disputes, have more or less been resolved through these treaties or conventions. These agreements that were signed under the auspices of the Gulf Cooperation Council in an attempt to try and restore order, and also in an attempt also to ensure monitoring and inspection in the various neighborhoods and towns outside of Sana'a, as a result of the actions undertaken by those groups operating outside of the state authority. But the security forces are doing their utmost to implement the initiative that was launched by the Gulf Cooperation Council in order to restore order. Once again, I recognize, of course, that there are still a number of persistent problems, basically as a result of the presence of weapons throughout Yemeni society. There are some 63 million arms in circulation, 63 million weapons in circulation. And that would mean that each Yemeni inhabitant would have access to 2 or 3 weapons as a result. We have sought to implement a draft bill through the parliament in order to prohibit the right to carry a weapon. Unfortunately, that was rejected by Parliament, and currently we are discussing the possibility of implementing rule of law within a civic society, where one of the issues we will tackle will also be the carrying of weapons, and this has been made a priority for the establishment of our rule of law. Clearly, there are complex problems persisting within Yemeni society, and all of this will require time. We will not be able to solve all of these problems in the course of just 2 or 3 years. The new coalition government is facing huge challenges, truly huge challenges. And we referred to these obstacles at the start of our statement yesterday in the context of our preliminary comments. And as a result, because of these huge challenges, they have also an impact on human rights issues and on the everyday situation of our citizens, the persistent problems such as security issues, social difficulties, poverty. All of these aspects impede upon the right of our citizens to enjoy all of their rights and freedoms. And also in the past, the state has been unable to guarantee access to basic services for our citizens. With regard to the restrictions that have been placed on freedom of movement and the presence of foreign observers and foreigners in Yemen, as you know, international observers are present in Yemen. They are there in order to follow and monitor the implementation of the Security Council resolution with the Special Envoy Mr. Jamal Ben Omar, Resolution 2014. And these observers visit Yemen on a regular basis in order to take stock of the various mechanisms that have been implemented for the purpose of monitoring the Security Council resolution. And reports are duly submitted to the Security Council in order to follow the various steps and measures that have been taken for the purposes of the implementation of the resolution. There are also a number of NGOs that are present in Yemen who are monitoring the events as they take place. Human Rights Watch is there, so is Amnesty International. And they are present in Yemen and report regularly. There are also various international NGOs that visit our territory. There is also strong cooperation between the international organizations and the local organizations to closely follow human rights issues and thus to help contribute to strengthening the capacities and abilities of local NGOs. Turning to the question as to whether the state is truly in control of the army, I can say that the transitional government does control the army. This is something that is being studied. We're studying the restructuring of our army. On the 23rd of March, on the 23rd of March last year, we witnessed a split within the armed forces. A section joined the uprising, a section remained with the state. And so the question we currently face and that we're seeking to tackle is the restructuring of the Yemeni armed forces. The army must obey one single authority, one single state authority. And therefore, this is a situation that needs to be resolved as soon as possible. And it is something that the political parties have been tackling as a matter of priority, even before engaging in the national dialogue.
حول موضوع الاعتقالات.
Now, with regard to the arrests, with regard to this matter, we've received various human rights organizations, as well as representatives of detainees and their lawyers, and the specialized agencies who have met with the Ministry of the Interior and the representatives of the national security system, all those who are stakeholders in this area regarding the illegal detention or where the rights of detainees have been violated. We have set up working groups for the freedom of expression of these detainees to ensure that their political rights are upheld. This is something that has been studied very closely. A number of documents have been tabled to that end. And the ministry has decided to release all political detainees. Decrees have been issued to ensure that this matter be followed very closely, and we are working together with international NGOs in order to make sure that all of those individuals who are still being held are released. We have a list of detainees, and we are keeping a very close eye on it. The government has informed us that this is a list of individuals who have been accused of criminal acts, and they are not considered political prisoners. They're not being held because of the opinions that they may have voiced or expressed, but they are being held as they have committed acts that come under the criminal code. They have not yet stood trial, and we must ensure that their rights are upheld, that they have access to a lawyer, to family visits, and there have indeed been problems with regard to the rights of these detainees, in particular when it comes to terrorists. Terrorism is a very sensitive subject within Yemen, and in particular as a result of the international ramifications that this has. But in spite of this, we insist that these individuals who are also suspected of terrorist acts also be held in conditions that respect the law, and that their arrests be legal arrests. With regard to the special courts, We have received information indicating that a number of individuals have been arrested and are being held in special prisons. And the government has looked into this matter and has decided that there is a need to have detailed information as to where these confidential, these secret prisons are. These are secret, clandestine prisons. And unfortunately, once again, the heads of these courts and tribunals in a number of cases are not directly under the authority of the state. They compete to a certain extent with the state authority. There is a type of rivalry between these special courts and the state authority. These are therefore secret prisons, secret structures, and this is truly problematic. During the revolution, young people were calling for the establishment of a new modern state for that specific reason, because there is this rivalry or competition between the heads of these special courts, who are very wealthy, who have significant resources at their disposal, and in some cases are aided and abetted. So turning to the matter of the secret prisons and the location of the secret prisons to ensure that they are closed, I agree with you. This is indeed a huge challenge that we face. But when seeking to establish rule of law, we must ensure that rule of law is prevalent throughout our territory, and that therefore this issue needs to be addressed most urgently. With regard to the high demographic concentration within these prisons, the overcrowding of these prisons, it is clear that the capacity of these prisons has been overburdened. Often these are individuals who have not been tried, or sometimes these are individuals who have finished their sentence but are still within the prison. And we are discussing with the prosecutor's office in order to resolve all of these issues. And then the question also arises of individuals who are imprisoned or detained because they're in debt. And we have a very long list of these individuals. A number of them have been released. This depends on the amount of outstanding debt. And here I would underscore that we are doing our utmost to release individuals who are being detained for reasons of debt with input from the private sector. The involvement of the private sector is closely linked to such issues of insolvability. And Ramadan also plays an important role in this respect. Ramadan is a time where many acts of charity take place and where many individuals seek to contribute towards easing the debt of these detained debtors and to get them out of prison because they are insolvent.
في موضوع القضاء موضوع
With regard to the legal system, we have indicated that there is truly a need to reform the judiciary. Unfortunately, corruption is one of the problems that we face. It is one of the reasons that the judiciary is not truly independent in our country. And this is quite clear, and therefore there is an evident need for its reform, as this is a key component of the reforms that we are seeking to undertake in all of the state institutions. And this ties in with the fact that the separation of powers is extremely important to ensure that the executive does not encroach on the work of the legislative or of the judiciary.
تنصت على مكالمات المواطنين.
With regard to wiretapping, this is clearly something that is prohibited by our constitution, but unfortunately, as you know, even developed democratic states have made use of such methods of wiretapping. In Yemen, we are of the view that anything that contravenes the law, anything that is equivalent to a violation of citizens' rights, must be terminated, must be abolished. And such actions are no longer permitted. They must be punished by law.
حول موضوع حرية الاعتقاد الديني في الدستور اليمني هناك احترام.
Then with regard to the freedom of religion and of belief, in our constitution, these freedoms are clearly stipulated. We have Jewish minorities, we have a Christian minority who enjoy the freedom of religion and belief, and they are not prevented from doing so by anybody. Nobody impedes them in any way in these freedoms. There is also a Shiite and Sunni groups. Some have said that the Shiite minority have been unable to practice freely, or that they've been unable to practice certain aspects of their religion. For example, it has been said that they've been prevented from carrying out the rite of Eradir. But we witnessed that this event took place in Sada, that people were able to practice this rite, free from any constraint.
ليست هناك أي مظاهر معادية للسامية. لدينا مجموعة من
There is no anti-Semitism in our country. There are some 400 Jewish individuals in the north of the country. Quite the contrary, if problems arise in the Sadat region, then it was the Jews who came to the capital and were given safe housing, safe accommodation. They are Yemenis, and therefore they enjoy the same rights and are under the same obligations as all other citizens. With regard to the army is a Yemeni institution. Any member of our society can join the army. In the past, there was compulsory military service that was abolished, and that means now that anybody who decides to join the army has the choice to do so. It is a personal choice. A number of articles in the Constitution can be interpreted in the following manner. There are articles that refer to the election of the members of parliament or the election of the president, and such articles underscore that an individual must have an ethical code. But what exactly does that mean? It's quite difficult to interpret. It can be interpreted in various ways. These are quite flexible texts. So these types of articles in our constitution are ambiguous when seeking to implement our reform, and this is part of our plan for 2012, the national legislative reform. Of course, we will be drawing on international texts to help us in this respect, and that will give us an opportunity to closely study all of these articles and to reformulate them. Concerning the freedom of movement of foreigners, the question that arises is the safety and security of these individuals. For a long time, because of the incursions of armed groups who kidnapped foreigners, these armed groups that were not under control of the Yemeni state, and because we were seeking to protect the physical integrity of these foreign individuals, we did our utmost to protect them. It was not, sometimes it wasn't even the Yemeni state that would insist upon this, but it was the foreign consulates or embassies that told their own nationals that they should be careful when traveling within Yemen, and that therefore they imposed restrictions on their movements themselves. Turning to the freedom of opinion and expression. To be frank, there is a relatively broad margin for freedom of opinion and expression for the various forms of the media, in the written press, in the radio, and in television. There's as I said, a relatively generous margin for maneuver for these various channels. And there are also various sites that are critical of the government, and we are doing what we can in order to increase this diversity and to broaden this space. Turning to the freedom of assembly, to establish trade unions and to establish associations. This is reflected in the law of 2001, which provides for the establishment of political, personal, economic associations, and therefore there are no restrictions whatsoever in this regard. The number of civil society organizations have increased. There used to be 7,000 such organizations in our country, and now there are more than 11,000 civil society organizations. These may be very small organizations in some cases, or medium-sized. But once they are established, these organizations must register with the state to ensure their legal organization. And if the Ministry of the Interior upholds this registration, if there is no reason in any way to impede the establishment of such organizations, then their freedom of assembly and their freedom to undertake activities is also upheld. But civil society continues to request that any remaining restrictions be repealed and that more space be set aside for the further establishment of civil society organizations. Now, there are organizations that are state-run and that are supported by the government and by the state. Naturally, we would prefer for civil society to be entirely separate and distinct from the state, and that is also a component of our general plan for reform. Turning to the electoral list, we are currently going through this list. There are a number of individuals on the list who have deceased. There are individuals who previously did not have the right to vote and now do. And then also, you have to take into account the fact that people move, that their addresses have changed, and that therefore all of these lists need to be updated. And our plan is to set up a national civil registry for elections. And to ensure that these individuals each be assigned a national identity number, which will improve the situation. Those who are running for the first time were able to participate in previous elections by using their national identity card. And so legal measures are being implemented in order to help support these types of developments.
I fully agree with the question on raising awareness of the population with regard to international instruments. It is very important. But I also wanted to stress that the citizens of Yemen and in many Arab countries don't even know about their national laws. And sometimes we don't even have the text of these laws. Unfortunately, there are texts of law that do exist, but which are not implemented. And unfortunately, citizens aren't even aware of their own national laws as citizens, the laws that are in existence. So we really need to make a very great effort. and that the Ministry of Human Rights included in this program, in this year's program, activities and programs to disseminate the information of international instruments. We're doing this in various ways. We will be organizing awareness-raising workshops and conferences so that citizens realize that these laws are in existence. People don't even know that there is this covenant, this international covenant. Illiteracy also is something that we need to overcome. But there's also a kind of legal illiteracy which exists. People aren't aware of these laws. NGOs, so civil society organizations, need to play the role which is theirs in order to contribute to this issue. With regard to partnerships, of course, we need to create networks of partnerships, and we are currently overhauling our constitution and our legislative framework in Yemen. We would like to reinforce international partnerships with the United Nations, with the High Commissioner for Human Rights, with Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. So we really do need this type of network, and we do give it a great deal of importance and significance because they will help us from a technical standpoint and institutionally to give us, to empower us and to create a framework in Yemen for human rights. Thank you.
Complete something. Okay. So.
Thank you very much, Minister Ahmed. I have one member of the committee who would like to pose a follow-up question. Mr. Telling, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not so much a question, perhaps, as a comment, and I think a reflection of a common understanding. I'm very grateful for the answers to my concerns regarding the illegal detainees and issues surrounding that. And I first note that the opinion that the state is not in full control of the armed forces, including, I take it, the security apparatus as such, was not correct. And I take heart in that you do have full control. And if you do have full control, obviously it would be easier then to do what I also think is the common understanding, that you do not oppose. On the contrary, you welcome the additional help from the international community, NGOs. You yourself, Madam Minister, mentioned Human Rights Watch. So I would suggest that, since my estimate of the number of detainees, which was given to me by NGOs, you may recall that I mentioned that, given the facts 2009 and 2011, we seem to have around 5,000 illegal detainees at the moment. That should be seen in light of the number of prisoners officially registered, which amount to some 11,000. Well, 5,000 in relation to 11,000, that's a considerable number of people detained and imprisoned. So my suggestion would be that the NGOs would be allowed to work with the authorities in order to establish who is actually being detained. And here I think it's important, you made references to the release of political prisoners. I think we need to understand that the rights under Article 9 and Article 14 of the Covenant relates to all detainees, regardless of whether they are deemed to be arrested, detained for being political criminals, ordinary criminals, or terrorists. And I think it would benefit the future reform work that your country is admirably undertaking if we could solve this uncertainty more than the short term. And I'm certain you would find willing assistance, not only by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which was rightly mentioned. I think you made a reference yesterday to that as well, and my colleague Mr. O'Flaherty reinforced that. And together then with other NGOs, I think it should be if you are in control of the detention centers, be they of a private character or public or semi-public or whatever, it should be a matter in the short term to be able to make the finding who is detained and when should the release be. And of course, if there is a need, they should be either released immediately or, at the minimum, brought before a judge to establish the legality of the detention. And what I am actually looking for is a commitment on your part, Madam Minister, that this will happen. And I see by your nods that you seem to be in accord with me on this point. And with that, I end. But I would also like to remind us all that there is in movie theaters in this city being shown a movie called Salmon Fishing in Yemen. And to my delight, it gives a very optimistic and positive view of Yemen. So I would encourage everyone who has the chance to see that movie. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tellin. Would you like to respond, Your Excellency?
Yes, I would like to respond regarding the number of prisoners, and I would say that the number is not really a fixed number, because in some instances there are people who are released and then others are detained, and of course we have a reservation regarding that certain institutions do not give us the accurate number of the detainees and the information on their release.
Thank you, Excellency. I think yes, Mr. Buzit, you can have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have just one point of clarification. I'm seeking the clarification on journalism in general, and in particular during the events that Yemen has gone through. Al-Ayyam is one of the newspapers that were affected, and also a number of journalists were brought forward to the special or specialized courts, and therefore my question is, how would you deal with the journalists in this new era, and how you will be dealing with them in a more just manner? Thank you.
You have the floor.
Yes, indeed, regarding Al-Ayyam newspaper, it was stopped for a very long time, for 2 years, to be precise. I spoke with the editor-in-chief, Mr. Rahim, and I also spoke with the Minister of Information on the necessity to give the possibility for this newspaper to resume its activities, especially that it covers a lot of the life and issues related to the south of Yemen. Regarding this newspaper in particular, there is one person who was arrested, and it is claimed that he used weapons and in such a way that there were victims, there were people killed in that incident. And I gave the Minister of Information the advice to segregate the two issues. The issue of the guard of the Al-Ayyam newspaper who used the weapons, this is one issue. And the other issue, which is the freedom that should be given to this newspaper to resume its activities. As for arresting the journalists and bringing them in front of specialized courts, this is a matter that is related to the freedom of expression, and the new government should indeed change its policy. Freedom should be given to journalists. There should be a wide margin of liberties and freedoms as this is stipulated by our Constitution. I have to admit that we have noticed recently a wide spread activities for people who would issue pamphlets and many means of expression of ideas and points of view. And in addition to newspapers, we have TV stations and broadcasting stations. And I believe that in the future there will be indeed improvement of the media law. However, there is an issue which is the unbiased stances of media stations. We give a higher ceiling for freedoms and liberties in general.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Would you, in the absence of any further comments from the members of the committee, would you like to make a closing statement? As we've come to the end of the dialogue.
In conclusion, I would like to thank you, Madam Chair, and I would like to thank all the members of the committee because they have enriched the discussion on the country report provided by Yemen. I would like to thank you for the inquiries that you have brought forward regarding the implementation of by Yemen of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. Everything that you have said, we will take it back home, especially that this is really important for us when we embark on the endeavors to perform the multifaceted reform in such a way that we will improve the respect of human rights and the civil and political rights. We are looking forward to a constructive and positive partnership with the international community, in particular the United Nations organization, as well as many of the non-governmental organizations. We are looking forward to have profound and genuine reforms. We are speaking about the reconstruction of the legislative system. We are speaking about the reconstruction of the state as a whole. And therefore, we are going to take back all the ideas that you have expressed. Of course, you know very well that we are witnessing a very active movement in Yemen. We listen to the people. We listen to the young Yemeni citizens. We listen to them, to their options, to their choices as to the changes that we are going to conduct in Yemen. And we look forward to having the following report that we are going to present to your commission that will shed the light on many improvements ahead. And the participation in this meeting was a very valuable chance for us that has given us the possibility to understand more and know more on how we are going to improve our work. Thank you, Madam Chair again.
Minister Ahmed. I will also say a few words in conclusion. I think we've had a good dialogue, and that's mainly due to the fact that you have shown a strong personal commitment to human rights. And we have taken note that your country is in transition, and that's all the more reason that we have welcomed your willingness to discuss openly some of the challenges that were raised during this dialogue. A number of areas of concern have emerged. We started with the situation of women yesterday and their human rights, and we moved on to issues such as the situation in South Yemen. We have looked at the position of security forces, in particular the armed forces, issues of arbitrary detention, the situation of people held in detention, the special courts and their role, the legal framework around which they continue to operate, issues of freedom of movement, freedom of association, freedom of expression, issues of religious minorities, and many, many more. But we hope that the commitment your new coalition government has shown to upholding human rights and to building institutions based on the rule of law will continue throughout this transition period. And lastly, Your Excellency, you still have the opportunity to send us written replies to any issues that you think you did not have enough time to elaborate on during this period we've spent with you. You will have about 48 hours within which to do that, and I'm sure this has been explained already to you. Finally, let me bid you farewell and wish you a very pleasant journey home, and hope that the future bodes well for your country. Thank you very much.
ولكن أنا أطلب زيادة في الوقت.
Well, I would ask for some more time. We may need a week because, as you know, we have a very long way back home, and therefore, if you can give us, please, more time so that we can send you our responses. Would you please give us that, Madam Chair? Some more time? 1 week. We need 1 more week.
Your Excellency, unfortunately, our rules of procedure are such that we cannot be flexible on that one.
No problem. We are going to do it.
Thank you
very much. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Very welcome.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you.